cherished candidate. Welcome to the interview. When I ask a question, obviously, like, you can pause, take your time to reflect and think, like, no rush. So just to get things started, my name's Greeley. Can you introduce yourself? Your name, what are you studying, what year of your degree are you in?
Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me for the interview. My name's Zayed Tabish. I study arts and law. I'm in my third year of university, but my second year at the University of Sydney.
Awesome. And what's your favorite place to go on campus that's a USU venue? Like, what do you spend your time doing?
It's going to sound very basic, but I'd say my favorite place is probably Courtyard. I really like the food, and the coffee is much better than other venues. Don't tell them. And I tend to see a lot of people around, which is always great fun.
That is awesome. And why are you running for board?
Well, the reason that I'm running for board is that both myself and my peers have expressed a lot of frustrations with the current way that the USU is running. Obviously, the USU is meant to be a student union, and as a result should serve the best interests of students. I've had friends, though, whose clubs have been left unregistered for 3 months at a time. I've heard stories from people in autonomous spaces, which I myself am a user of, where we've seen that garbage has just piled up and not been taken out, despite that being part of the USU's responsibilities. And I've also just seen that, food at venues is just really expensive sometimes. And when I'm late in Fisher Library studying and I want a snack, I have to buy overpriced vending machine food, which I think kind of sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure most students would agree with a lot of these sentiments.
Yeah, for sure. I guess that leads quite well into...
Yeah. Picking, have you done your policy? Yeah. No. Okay. Can you name your top 3 policies?
Sure. My first top 3 policy, and probably the most important one, is ensure that the USU responds to all communications within 5 business days. I think this is really important for increasing transparency, accountability, and communication generally. Second is to implement Recite Me, which is essentially a tool which allows you to change font sizes, colors, or translate text into, or even text to speech into the USU website. I think this would do wonders under the USU's current plans to actually increase and improve inclusion for those who may have disabilities. And then finally, this is my favorite one, feed Chester the biodigester. Brief explanation of who Chester is. It's a large machine that can turn organic waste into compost within 24 hours, and it would be really useful for managing a lot of the waste on campus.
Yeah, okay. So with your favorite one, how did you come up with it? Was it your idea? Who did you consult? Like, what research did you do before deciding that this was a priority for the uni, for USU?
Well, I'll speak specifically to Chester the biodigester here.
Mm-hmm.
I can't at all claim to take credit for this. This has been a policy that's been floated around many years in the past and has been a particularly important thing. I did know that it had existed. I've been told by people who are more senior to me at university, and it's also available on the university website. The actual mechanisms of how I want to implement this, I've discussed with my campaign managers, my campaign mentors, and others to actually develop a practical way and solution to implement the policy.
Nice. So can you describe your politics without using words like right wing, left wing, progressive, or independent? More like specific or substantive,
I think the best way for me to do this then, if it's all good, is to use specific policies that I support or
Mm-hmm.
specific thoughts. For instance, I'm a very strong believer in a strong social welfare system in which people aren't allowed to slip through cracks. People are made sure that the institutions that support them are really well funded, like public institutions. For instance, public hospitals, public education, public tertiary education, and the criminal justice system all work for people rather than anything else. I think a really important thing in regards to this is often that it needs to be in democratic hands as opposed to corporate shareholders. Something else that I value really importantly is I do have a sense of social justice. The way that I view this happening, as a child of immigrants, as someone who has a Muslim background, The way that I think that this needs to manifest is that everyone gets the same opportunities, everyone is able to access the same opportunities, and as a result just sort of be able to take advantage of those opportunities rather than structural disadvantages weighing them down.
Yeah. Are you a member of any political party or a campus student faction?
Both. I'm a member of the Australian Labor Party, the New South Wales branch, and I'm a member of New South Wales Labor students on campus.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. So, why are you a part of ALP, and I guess why you're part of the NSWLS?
Two separate answers, I'd say. With the ALP in year 12, I was quite keen to get involved with my community, and during this time there was also the voice referendum. I thought that the ALP was very correct in principle in trying to implement the voice referendum, and it's something that I supported. So I decided that I want to be a part of this party to work towards passing the referendum. Unfortunately, obviously it didn't happen, which is quite upsetting. Why I'm a member of New South Wales Labor students? Well, coming onto campus, I was actually considering multiple factions. I saw there was Switch at the time, there was also Grassroots, and there was NSWLS. I sat down, considered it, and I came to the conclusion that NSWLS most aligns with my personal politics. And also, I've just made some really good friends in my faction, and I'm really happy that I'm supported by them.
Yeah. In your view, so like, how does NSWLS differ from NLS or Unity?
From NLS and Unity?
Yeah.
I think that I'll first deal with the distinction from Unity. I think that Unity's politics tend to be more what they define as pragmatic and more centrist. Whereas I think the differences with NLS often are a little bit more minute, but it's generally to do with similar issues of pragmatism. I do think that NSWLS would be the most left-wing Labour faction on campus.
Nice. I guess this leads into whether you think the USU should be more political or less political. What is the line that you think there should be drawn?
I think historically the USU has taken political stances, and that's a good thing, for two reasons. Firstly, I think that politics impact students. The vast majority of the time, political decisions such as the re-indexation of HECS debt from CPI to WPI is something that directly impacts all students. Secondly, I think that students hold political views, and there generally is a consensus within the student body. The USU is a student union and therefore has a responsibility to reflect and represent those political views.
Yeah, on that topic, BDS, Boycott, Divest, system has been a sustained topic at recent USU board meetings. The current board has declined to adopt it. If elected, would you support the USU integrating it? Why or why not?
100%. BDS is an issue that's personally very, very important to me. I think this can be evidenced in that I did attend a board meeting and I did speak out regarding BDS, and I'm very happy. I also was at NUS where I also spoke out saying specifically the student union, specifically the USU should implement BDS. BDS is really important to me. I grew up, big parts of my childhood were spent in the Middle East. My neighbors, my entire street, it was the children of Palestinian refugees. And these were people that I could see firsthand, like the trauma that actually impacted them. So like, I can only really shudder to think how it impacts people who are unfortunately suffering in the Middle East right now. And I think students support BDS. By and large, we have evidence that clubs and societies have signed on. There's been petitions, there's been open votes that all indicate that students as a whole support BDS.
Just following up on that, how would you plan on integrating BDS within the USU?
I think that BDS has been a controversial topic on the USU because there's been a concern that it doesn't align with fiduciary duty, specifically the economic interests and financial interests of the USU. I think that this is untrue. The USU Constitution specifically notes that the USU has a responsibility to represent the views and the best interests of the student community as well as the community as a whole, so students and the community as a whole. The specific interpretation of this clause could be interpreted in a way that allows student directors to remain in alignment with their student duty. And the way that this interpretation would be acknowledged or affirmed would be through the passing of a special general meeting, where members would vote on whether or not they consider BDS in the best interests, and then this would empower the board to make that decision without breaching their fiduciary financial duty.
Yeah. So in the recent meetings, I believe last month or in March, an SRC councillor asked whether Coca-Cola's Welcome Fest activation was a paid sponsorship. One of the directors, executive directors, I think, confirmed that it was, but said that USU's commercial arrangements are not disclosed. So I have a question. So should USU sponsorship arrangements be publicly disclosed to members?
100%. The USU at the end of the day is a student union, and students have a right to know where their money is going, where their money is coming from, and where the funding and how funding works. Like, I mean, I want to know where my SAF fees are going. I'm sure you guys do as well. Unfortunately, not enough goes to Oni.
Nice answer. Given Coca-Cola is named in BDS campaigns, would you have signed off on that sponsorship as a board director?
As previously mentioned, I think the first thing that needs to be done is a proper interpretation of the Constitution, which allows it to not be a breach of fiduciary duty. If I could do it without being sued for every single dollar I have in an accusation of a breach of fiduciary duty, I would not have signed that under any circumstances. I'd personally engage in a consumer boycott of most BDS listed organizations.
And I guess another scenario question would be, let's say you were elected, and during a board meeting, how comfortable would you be disagreeing with, let's say, one of the execs or a fellow board director? Can you walk me through how would you handle a moment where you think someone is wrong on a public-facing issue?
On a public-facing issue, so would this be on an in-camera session, or would this be more generally and people can see my responses here?
You can do both.
Okay, so in a more personal and in-camera session perhaps, would be a very direct and frank conversation with the board director. I'm very happy to disagree with people when need be. I specifically did, in the board meetings that I have attended, I have disagreed with members of the executive and elected board directors. This isn't an issue for me. I think a very important thing on board though, is that people need to work together on board. This doesn't matter if you share political leanings with these people. The way that resolutions are passed, the way that motions are passed is through mutual respect and through cooperation. So this applies to both the public facing and the internal. I would disagree respectfully. I would criticize the policy, I would criticize the mechanisms, but I wouldn't criticize the person. I don't think that is actually very practical, nor does it lead to any sort of change on the board.
And can you name one thing you're critical about how the USU currently operates?
I think the USC needs to respond to his damn emails. Like, as I've mentioned multiple times, my friends and just other people who I've sat down and spoken to in the lead up to this election have been like, we weren't getting responses for months at a time. We'd suddenly get a response the day off, which completely changes something, and then organizing things becomes incredibly difficult at that. I think establishing a structure in which the USU is able to effectively respond to communications is the main thing that I would look to do if elected on board.
I guess on the opposite end of that, can you, I guess, name one positive thing about how the USU currently operates?
I think to point to an example of one positive thing is that the USU did implement incorporation in a manner that was consistent with what students wanted. Incorporation failed in the first round because students weren't happy with the governance changes. The USU took these on board and then provided a much more compelling argument to give to the students, which they did then vote in support of. This indicates that the USU, at times, it could obviously work on it, does take into account student feedback where necessary.
Have you read the 2025-2028 strategic plan?
I have, yes.
Yeah, so again, I guess this would, you'd be able to answer this one. So can you pick one thing you agree with in that plan and one thing that you disagree with?
I think one thing that I agree with is that the USU does need to diversify its revenue sources. SAF funding can be unpredictable at times, and obviously the more money, the wealthier the union is, the better student services it can provide to students. Yeah. So diversification through partnerships is something that I would support and something that I agree with. Something that I disagree with though is how nebulous it is as a whole. I think I'd specifically point to the objective that's high performance team culture, I would ask, what does that mean? How does that actually impact the staff, who are obviously the recipient of this primarily? How do we make sure that they're being remunerated properly? How do we make sure that they don't feel that they're not being given too much work? How do we make sure that the workload is shared equally? I think the USU needs to be much more specific in what this refers to and in its explanation of how it looks after its staff in the meantime.
Moving on from that, so a bit of another hypothetical scenario. So let's say a group of students rocks up to a board meeting and demands you take a position you disagree with on a certain issue. They're quite persistent about it. How would you handle that?
I think the first thing is these students need to be heard. They are expressing a concern and they have every single right to express this concern, and they're likely quite valid in this expression of concern. I would say I can't make any conclusions right now. I need to look into this. Obviously, I'm not super sure the specifics of this. I need to look into this. I need to look into how it works. I need to consider whether or not the general student populace agrees with this. But I make it very obvious that my door is open, my DMs are always open, and if this is a very important thing, I will sit down with these students, I will discuss it and try to understand all perspectives.
Right, you've already touched on this a bit. What's one issue at the university, broadly, it doesn't have to be like a USU thing, that you really care deeply about?
One issue that I would say I care deeply about, obviously separate from like BDS and effective communication that I mentioned earlier, is affordability. I know that's a really basic answer, but it's a good thing that it's a basic answer. I think students are really suffering recently. We've seen inflation's been really high. Obviously, I'm really thankful that I live at home, but people's rent gets really high a lot of the time. And food and beverages just get really, really expensive. And I think one of my policies that I would seek to implement if elected on board to address this is introducing a $5 option at every venue. Something that is a sustainable meal and something that will be like relatively pleasurable to eat, I suppose, at every venue, not just at the Wentworth building from 12 to 2.
Yeah, and I guess a big question every year for board directors would be accountability and delivering those promises that they have campaigned towards. How would you hold yourself accountable to the students who voted for you?
I think the first thing that I'll preface this by saying is that policies that any candidate makes are not a guarantee. There are negotiations on board people need to discuss, and there needs to be a majority to pass any actual resolutions. So I would preface it by saying that the policies that I, and I'm sure other candidates are promising, are things that they will fight for, not things that they can guarantee are implemented. I think in a situation where I'm failing to fight for these, I would make sure that the people who are in my portfolios generally are holding me accountable, that my fellow board directors are holding me accountable. And I think intuitively there is somewhat of a mechanism where board directors do hold each other accountable through just like word of mouth, etc. If there is a general concern, then I will seek to address that concern, and I will make sure to reach out to the relevant people to ask them how I can improve my performance whilst on board.
Right. At the March meeting, you raised the supermajority and Senate appointed directors problem on BDS. If elected, what's your actual plan to move BDS or any other policy that could face the same structural blocker?
Well, as previously indicated with the Constitution and interests, notably, whilst the answer given was just it's sort of up to the board directors, in reality, board directors do have a responsibility to act in the best interests. So I would do, as previously mentioned, bring the issue to a general meeting, an SGM, and allow that to be passed through. If needed, I'm more than happy to work with any candidates and discuss what policies they want, because generally board directors are quite reasonable. They're not pointlessly against something, they generally have something else they want implemented. So I'll work with as many people as feasibly possible to gain the numbers to move this to an SGM.
And on that, if you, let's say we're focusing on your plan to move BDS, specifically which directors do you think you can work with on their interests, like which directors do you think you can move reasonably?
In that, who would I want to work with, or just specifically on this issue?
On that issue.
On this issue.
On this issue, I think that James Green from Unity would be happy to. Bohout from Penta would be someone who I'd be very happy to work with. This is for candidates currently, and then
It can be on the board as well.
okay. So James, Bohout, Nabila, I think they'd all work. Of the candidates, work very hard towards it. I'm sure Will McCarthy would as well. There's also on the current board we see Layla Wang. She's a very good friend of mine, and I think that she's very personally pro BDS. There's Archie Wolfson, who is a committed left-wing candidate and would be supportive of BDS. I'm sure that Sally would also be willing to. Obviously, the year above do phase out, so perhaps they won't be as relevant, but I'm happy to discuss that.
Yeah. So again, on the meetings that you've attended, you asked Fan Vu, so the president, what evidence of student support that USU would accept on BDS. So I guess what's your answer to that question would be, and what mechanism would you actually trust?
I suppose firstly there is a general petition from clubs and societies as well as an open letter that has been signed by many people. I would personally say that's a sufficient mechanism. If the USU is not happy with that, I'd be prepared to create a further petition, which wouldn't just be clubs and societies, but would be individual members as a whole signing on and indicating interest. I would also potentially propose a counter one to address any views that may not be supportive of BDS, and that way you can basically prove that there is a general student consensus, even if there are some differences.
Yeah. Moving on. So you'll be one of the 5 directors elected.
Inshallah.
Yeah, hopefully. So NSWLS, I guess, or any faction, any candidate running with a faction would obviously have expectations on how its members vote, move their policy or what kind of policy they want to move in the board. I guess, how do you handle a situation where your faction has a position on the USU board that matters to you, or a conflict between the two?
If there's a conflict in the sense of a traditional conflict of interest, I'd recuse myself from that issue because I cannot be dealing with those objectively and fairly under my fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
I will note that my faction is not binding on USU board. When it comes to matters, I act independently and in consideration of my fiduciary duty and the best interests of the board. So I would make that very, very clear, and I would act in accordance with what is best for the USU.
Yeah. And as you already know, in the previous meetings, lots of issues have arise regarding the safe spaces, autonomous spaces in Manning. If you take on a portfolio that runs an autonomous space, what does accountability to those users actually look like? And what's your commitment on, I guess, like the response times that you already touched on earlier?
Well, as a proud member of ACAR and someone who has spoken with a lot of members of ACAR, including one of my friends who bought a Chromecast and was assured he'd be reimbursed and never was, I think that I would take on a position on the ethnocultural portfolio, hopefully, and I would work towards ensuring that my response times are firstly within 5 business days, as aforementioned. And also, I just think that I should be attending ACAR meetings as a member of, as the holder of the ethnocultural portfolio. And the same applies to other portfolios. The holder of the queer portfolio, for instance, should be responding to their emails promptly and should also be attending queer quack meetings. So that's probably the main bit of accountability, where my DMs will always be open, people can always come up to me with any specific issues, and I promise I'll reply.
Yeah, for those who don't know, can you tell us what ACAR is? And on that, maybe tell us about what the difference essentially between the SRC and the USU.
Of course. ACAR is the Autonomous Collective Against Racism. It's basically a group of people of color who are able to join, and they're able to move ideas and policies that specifically impact individual people of color. And it is an SRC collective. However, it does use the USU safe spaces and is responsible for the management of them generally. The difference between the USID SRC and the USU, I'm a counselor on the SRC as well, which I'll note. The difference is primarily that the the SRC has a more activist, direct representation of students with everyday issues sort of role. For instance, caseworkers, legal support, or even just advocating for the continuation of 5-day simple extensions, like last year's president, Mr. Angus Fisher, did do very well, speaking with all the deans. The USU, in comparison, holds a lot of the clubs and societies. It's responsible for campus management as a whole, like venue management, as well as a lot of the larger events. So I'd say the SRC has a more activist role, whereas the USU has a more student services role.
Mm-hmm. And you attended 2 board meetings before nominating for board. Most other candidates didn't. What did that tell you about people on the board?
I don't think that this is the fault of other candidates. I'm very lucky to have been supported by a very helpful group of people who have guided me throughout this. The primary issue is that the board has sort of separated itself from accountability measures for students. If you look online, minutes are often uploaded really, really late. People don't know what's going on. The first USU meeting I went to, there weren't chairs. There was no expectation that people would come. The immediate past president had to go and get extra chairs for us to sit on the side. What this says about the board is that they've not been as successful in being accountable and sharing what is actually happening in board meetings. So they've almost existed in their own little bubble.
Yeah, amazing. So moving on from that, I guess one thing that was quite interesting to note in this year's board election is that 7 out of 11 candidates this year are law students. I've asked the same questions for the other candidates who are also doing law, but why do you think that is?
Well, my answer to that is that law students are ambitious and they think that they can implement changes and they have certain policies in mind that they always think they can do really well, and they think very highly of themselves, probably too highly of themselves. I will note that this isn't a recent phenomenon. If we're to look at the last 5-ish USU presidents, I believe 4 of them have been law students as well. So I think it just aligns very much so with the ambitions of law students.
Yeah. And I guess on that, a few students or some students that I have heard are concerned or have brought up the idea that 7 out of 11 law students running aren't really exactly reflective or representative of the wider student body.
That's fair.
Do you think that is a fair assessment?
I think that's a very fair assessment, and I think it's a criticism of university culture and I suppose Stupol culture, which does encourage a very specific subsect of people to go. Of course, I can appreciate that I can respect all of them. I can't reflect all of the diverse voices on campus, but what I can do is sit down and talk to all of these diverse voices, which I have been doing in the lead up to this election, and to take those policies, take those concerns up to board. I was really inspired personally by Naz Sharifi because she was the first Muslim to be president of the USU, and I think that shows really well how diversity inspires other people and will encourage them to do things as well, and therefore break free of this unfortunate culture.
Yeah, for sure. It's probably telling that, you're involved in SRC and in USU. It's probably a really different split in what students are studying and interested in between the SRC and this USU, as we've spoken. How do you think the diversity of the SRC and the USU, those discrepancies, what does that tell you about the student body, and how can you actually bring in more of that diversity in the USU, given that they are composed of students?
I think I really appreciate the diversity of the SRC, which I'll say very clearly. I think there's much more, there's a variety of groups of degrees, people from different backgrounds, people of different faiths, of different sexualities at the SRC, and I think that's really good. Mm-hmm. The way that this needs to be, I think the best way to address this on the USU is for more people to run, and more people who are of those groups to not be afraid of being judged or not being able to get on, and for them to try. Because I think that, as I mentioned earlier, diversity is a strength fundamentally, mm-hmm. and it's only when people run that other people are inspired and are able to also do those things.
Yeah, thanks. And as one of the 7 law students running, what do you think differentiates you from the other 6?
I'd answer this question in 3 parts. Firstly, I think I have some lived experience with a variety of different groups. Like, my family is obviously of an immigrant background. I'm Muslim, which I've said a few times now. Secondly, I think I have experience with student unionism as a whole, which most of the other candidates do not have. I think this has provided me a very specific view on the issues that affect the majority of students, and that's something I can bring. And then thirdly, I've engaged with every single facet of the USU, I would say. I've volunteered with the V team. I've served as executive and a subcom member on multiple CNS, clubs and societies. And I just, like every other student, regularly go down to Courtyard and have a drink. Like a coffee, because alcohol's haram. But clarifying in case mum's watching. So as a result, I think that I just have a lot of lived experiences which I can bring to the board, and I've also gone and spoken where my gaps have failed me.
Nice. So another hypothetical for you, it's campaign season, and I'm a politically disengaged student. How would you approach me and pitch yourself?
I think there'd be a few things that I would do. The first one would be, I would just introduce myself. I think people need to be more comfortable and not just be like, flyer, vote for me now. The first thing I would do is introduce myself. Then I would ask, has there been any specific issues that you felt have been affecting you on campus? Then, if not, I would specifically ask about affordability. I think this is something that impacts a lot of people. And I'd be like, would you appreciate a $5 option at all USU venues? And I'd say, if I could get your support, then I promise I'll advocate and fight really hard for $5 options on all venues.
That's actually a strong pitch, like,
Yeah.
got me.
Yeah, so as you have already mentioned earlier, and you do already notice, but like, yeah, 5 students or 5 candidates for this year's election will be elected. Let's say you're one of them.
Yep.
So which other 4 candidates would you want to work with on the board, and why?
I think very easily, the first 4 I would say are Bohau. I'm very good friends with Bohau, and I know his politics, and they are good politics. James, for a very, very similar answer. Nabila Chowdhury, once again, a very similar answer. For the last one, I'd have to decide between Serena Guo and Monica. I think I'm a little bit unsure as to who I would choose between them, but I do think they are both very fine candidates.
Yeah, and I guess who do you see is your strongest competition in this race?
I think, as mentioned earlier, it would probably be Bohau and James. We are very, very similar people, I suppose. We advocate very similar policies and likely have very similar voter bases. So I would say that they're probably my most direct competition, as well as some of my closest friends. So I think it's important to remember.
Yeah, nice. And why should a student vote for you? General question.
The main thing I'll do is I'll respond to my messages and I'll respond to my emails. I'll hold other board members accountable. I'll make sure that they're responding to their emails and they're responding to their messages. I know that you guys and everyone as a whole has had concerns where people are being ignored, be this CNS exec, autonomous members, and I'll just try my hardest, and I promise I'll try my hardest to make sure that that doesn't happen. Where I'm the one responding, like, I will respond. If it's someone else, I will annoy them until they respond. And lots of people can attest, I can be very annoying sometimes.
Thank you so much. Moving on to, I guess, the more lighter questions. Yeah, can you please tell us what your slogan is?
Get ahead with Zayed.
Oh, is there, I guess, a message behind that, and can you tell us, like, how did you come up with it?
Well, coming up with it was shockingly difficult because my name starts with a Z, and there's not many words that start with a Z. So I decided rhyming is the way to go. Get ahead in particular is something that I think resonates with a lot of students. Obviously, we want the university to get ahead, we want the USU to get ahead, we want individual students to get ahead, and we just want everyone to be going further, going and striving as far as they can for the best possible experiences that they can have at university. Was there another part of it?
No, it should be one. And the next one would be, what are your campaign colors?
Hot pink.
Hot pink. And can you tell us who your campaign manager is?
My campaign managers are Ava Cavallari, the Gen Sec of the SRC, Lucy Sullivan, Jess Heat, and Sargon Saluja.
What is your favorite drink to get on campus?
House iced tea at Courtyard. There's a different flavour every day, which is fire.
And lastly, before we let you go, what is your green flag and your red flag?
I have to take a minute to think of that one. I think they're very similar. My green flag is that if you want to talk about anything at all, I will listen to you yap for hours on end, even if it's the same topic, even if we've discussed it like 700 times before. My red flag on the inverse, though, is that I will not stop yapping. Like, I don't stop talking half the time. Yeah, I'd say those are my red and green flags.
Nice.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Yeah.
very, very much for having me.
Yes.
It was.
Amazing.